Most people don't realize how distracted their life has become. Not in a loud way, not in an obvious way. It's subtle, almost invisible. You wake up, you go through your day, you think you're living your life, but most of your attention is somewhere else. On other people, on what they're doing, what they're achieving, what they're saying, what they're posting, what they're becoming. And without noticing, your mind starts living outside of your own life. This is where the problem begins. Because your life is not just what you do physically. Your life is where your attention goes. And if your attention is constantly outside of yourself, then you are not really present in your own experience. You are observing life, not building it. You are reacting, not directing. You are watching, not creating. And that shift is quiet. It doesn't feel dramatic. You don't suddenly realize it one day. It builds slowly through habits you think are harmless. Checking what others are doing, comparing your progress, thinking about how you look in other people's eyes, replaying conversations in your head, overanalyzing things that don't require your energy. None of these feel like big problems individually, but together they create something heavy. Your attention becomes scattered, and when attention is scattered, life feels stuck. You start feeling like you're not moving forward, like something is missing, like everyone else is ahead, like you're late. But the truth is not that you are behind. The truth is your focus is divided, and when focus is divided, progress feels invisible. There's a strange illusion that happens here. You might be busy, you might be doing things, you might even be working hard, but inside, there's no clarity, no real sense of control. Because your attention is constantly being pulled outward. Every time you focus on someone else's life, you take a piece of energy away from your own. Every time you compare, you lose presence. Every time you react emotionally to something outside of your control, you disconnect from yourself. And slowly, without noticing, your mind starts living in a world that is not yours. A world built from opinions, comparisons, expectations, noise. And in that world, you are never enough, never ahead, never satisfied. Because that world is not designed for peace. It is designed for distraction. This is the part most people never question. They think their stress is coming from life itself, from their situation, from their circumstances. But if you observe closely, most of that stress is not coming from what is actually happening. It is coming from what they are paying attention to. Attention is powerful. Where it goes, your energy follows. If your attention is on other people, your energy goes there too. If your attention is on comparison, your emotions follow that. If your attention is on things you cannot control, your peace disappears. And the problem is, this becomes automatic. You don't consciously decide to waste your attention, it just happens through habit. Through constant exposure to noise. And that noise becomes normal. So normal that silence starts to feel uncomfortable. Focusing on yourself starts to feel boring. Being alone with your thoughts feels unfamiliar. And that is a warning sign most people ignore. Because a focused mind does not feel chaotic. A distracted mind does. But distraction can feel normal when you are used to it. So you don't question it. You just live inside it and call it life. But there is a difference between living and being mentally pulled in every direction. Real living has direction. It has awareness. It has control over where attention goes. Not perfection, not isolation, just awareness. And awareness is where everything starts to shift. When you begin to notice how often your attention leaves your own life, something uncomfortable happens at first. You start seeing how much time you've been giving away mentally. Not physically, mentally. Hours spent thinking about things that don't improve your situation. Energy spent on people who are not thinking about you. Emotions triggered by things that don't require your involvement. And once you see it clearly, you can't fully ignore it anymore. because now you realize something important. You are not as present in your life as you thought. You are present in pieces. A little here, a little there, a lot in other people's worlds. And that split creates internal confusion. You want progress, but your attention is not fully on your progress. You want clarity, but your mind is constantly reacting to external input. You want peace, but your awareness is scattered across too many directions. This is why life feels heavier than it should. Not because life is difficult, but because attention is unmanaged. And unmanaged attention becomes mental noise. Now the uncomfortable truth is this. If you keep living like this, nothing dramatic will happen immediately. You will still function. You will still move. You will still do things. But internally, you will feel constantly behind. Not because you are actually behind, but because your mind is never fully where you are. It is always somewhere else. And that somewhere else becomes the default state. So even when you are working on your life, a part of your mind is watching others. Even when you are trying to focus, a part of your attention is comparing. Even when you are trying to improve, a part of your energy is scattered. And over time, that creates frustration. Because effort without full attention feels incomplete. Now here is the shift. Not a dramatic change, not an overnight transformation, just a simple realization. You don't need more information about life. You need your attention back. Because without attention, nothing improves clearly. And with attention, even small actions become meaningful. This is the beginning of a different way of living. Not louder, not faster, just more present, more directed, more aware. And once you see how much of your life has been lived outside of your control, you start questioning where you actually want your attention to go next. Because you cannot build a stable life while your mind is constantly elsewhere. And that realization is the first step. Not fixing everything, not becoming perfect, just noticing where your attention has been going, and deciding that it belongs back with you. After the first realization, something uncomfortable starts to surface. You begin to notice how often your mind is not actually with you. Not physically, mentally. You might be sitting in one place, doing one thing, but your attention is constantly moving somewhere else. And the strange part is, it doesn't feel like a problem in the moment. It feels normal. Checking what others are doing, thinking about someone's progress, replaying what someone said, wondering how your situation compares, scrolling, observing, reacting, evaluating. None of it feels dramatic on its own. But together, it becomes a silent drain, a constant leak of mental energy. And most people never notice it, because it doesn't look like effort. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like just thinking. But thinking is not the issue. Uncontrolled thinking is. Because when your attention is not directed, it doesn't rest. It moves automatically. It attaches itself to whatever is loudest, newest, or most emotionally charged. And in today's world, there is always something loud, always something new, always something to compare. So your attention never stays still. And when attention never stays still, energy never fully returns to you. That's the hidden drain. Not exhaustion from doing too much, but exhaustion from being mentally everywhere at once. You start your day with some focus, maybe even intention. You tell yourself what you want to do. You set small goals in your mind. But as the day moves forward, attention slowly gets pulled outward. A notification, a thought about someone, a memory, a comparison, a reaction, a scroll, a distraction. And every time this happens, your internal direction weakens slightly. Just a little. But repeated many times in a day, it adds up. By the end of the day, you feel tired, but not fulfilled. Busy, but not clear. Active, but not grounded. And this creates a confusing feeling. Because logically, you did things, you moved, You responded, you handled moments, but internally, it feels like nothing really moved forward. That's because your energy was not directed in one place long enough to build momentum. It kept splitting, like water leaking from multiple small holes instead of flowing through one strong direction. And here's what makes it worse. You don't notice the loss in real time. You only feel the result at the end. A sense of heaviness, mental fatigue, frustration without a clear reason. A feeling that something is off, even if nothing bad happened. That's how the drain works. Quietly, repeatedly, without obvious warning signs. Now let's go deeper into where this drain actually comes from. One major source is comparison. Not direct comparison where you consciously think, I am better, or I am worse. But subtle comparison. Seeing someone's progress and automatically measuring your own. Hearing about someone's success and instantly evaluating your own position. Observing someone's life and letting your mind drift into what yours is not. This happens fast, almost instantly, and it pulls your attention away from your own path. Because in that moment, your focus is no longer on what you are doing, it is on what someone else has done. And that shift matters, because attention cannot fully exist in two places at once. So when it moves outward, something inside your own life becomes weaker. Your presence drops, your clarity drops, your sense of direction becomes unclear. And if this repeats throughout the day, you slowly lose connection with your own process. Another drain comes from mental replay. Conversations you had earlier, things someone said, how they looked at you, what you should have said, what you wish you said differently. Your mind keeps returning to moments that are already finished, trying to fix them, trying to analyze them, trying to reframe them, but nothing changes, except your energy keeps going back into something that no longer exists in the present. And while that happens, a present moment gets ignored. So your real life keeps moving forward, but your attention stays behind. This creates internal fragmentation. You are physically in today, but mentally stuck in yesterday or scattered across imagined versions of situations. And that fragmentation is what makes life feel heavier than it needs to be. There is also emotional reactivity. Small things trigger mental responses. A tone of voice, a message, a comment, a post, a reaction from someone else. And suddenly, your attention is pulled into processing it. Not always in a productive way. Sometimes it becomes overthinking. Sometimes it becomes interpretation. Sometimes it becomes silent emotional tension that stays with you longer than it should. Each of these reactions pulls energy away from your focus. Not because they are important, but because your mind treats them as important. And the more this pattern repeats, the more your attention becomes reactive instead of directed. Reactive attention is always unstable. It waits for something external to decide where it should go next. Directed attention is different. It stays where you place it. It doesn't constantly shift based on external input. And that difference changes everything. Now here's the uncomfortable part. Most of this draining happens automatically. You are not consciously choosing to lose focus. You are simply not interrupting the pattern. And because it feels familiar, it feels normal. But normal doesn't always mean useful. Sometimes it just means repeated. So the real question becomes this: where is your attention going when you are not aware of it? Because that is where your energy is going too. And once you see that clearly, it becomes harder to ignore. You start noticing how often your mind leaves your own life without permission. And that awareness is uncomfortable at first, because it shows how much control you are not actively using. But that discomfort is not a problem. It is clarity beginning to form. Now think about what changes when attention is no longer constantly leaking outward. When you stop reacting to everything immediately. When you stop mentally engaging with every external signal. When you start noticing where your mind goes and gently bringing it back, something shifts. Your energy feels more stable. Your thoughts feel less scattered. Feel more intentional. Not because life became easier, but because attention stopped being wasted in too many directions. Even simple tasks start to feel different. Not because they changed, but because your presence in them increased, and presence is what makes effort feel meaningful. Without presence, even productive action feels empty. With presence, even small actions feel grounded. This is why attention is not just a mental habit. It is the foundation of how you experience your entire life. If it is scattered, life feels scattered. If it is controlled, life feels clearer. So the hidden drain is not just about distraction. It is about unconscious direction, where your mind goes when you are not actively guiding it. And most people never question that. They assume their thoughts are just happening. But thoughts follow attention, and attention follows habits, which means you are not just thinking randomly. You are repeating patterns, and those patterns are shaping your experience of life. Once you understand this, the focus shifts, not toward controlling everything, but toward noticing where energy is leaking, and slowly bringing it back to your work, back to your actions, back to your present moment, because that is the only place anything real actually happens, and everything else is just noise pulling you away from it. There comes a point where you start to see something clearly. Not everything around you deserves your attention. Not every thought deserves a reaction. Not every opinion deserves space in your mind. And not every situation needs your emotional involvement. This is where the shift begins. Not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden change in personality. Just a quiet understanding that your mind has been overextended for too long. You've been giving attention to things that don't require it, and in doing that, you've been weakening your own focus. The Stoic approach starts from a simple idea. There are things you can control and things you cannot. But most people don't actually live by this. They understand it logically, but not practically. Because in real life, attention doesn't stay in that clean division. It leaks. It moves toward things outside of control without permission. Reactions from others, opinions, outcomes, comparisons, predictions, assumptions. And once attention moves there, your internal state changes immediately. You feel tension, you feel urgency, you feel pressure to respond to something you cannot actually influence. That's where noise enters the mind. Noise is not just external. Noise is internal reaction to external things. And once that reaction starts, it spreads quickly. One thought leads to another. One interpretation creates another layer of thinking. And suddenly, your mind is no longer focused on what you can do. It is focused on what you cannot control. That shift is subtle but powerful. Because every moment you spend mentally engaged with something outside your control is a moment you are not fully present in your own actions. And that is where life becomes unstable. Not because life is complicated, but because attention is misdirected. Stoicism is not about shutting down emotion. It is about directing attention correctly. That is the real shift. Learning to notice when your mind moves toward noise, and bringing it back to what is actually yours. Your actions, your choices, your responses, your effort. That is your space. Everything else is secondary. But the mind resists this at first, because it is used to reacting, used to engaging, used to trying to fix or understand everything immediately. So when you stop doing that, it feels uncomfortable. There is a sense of emptiness at first, like you are ignoring something important. But you are not ignoring reality. You are just refusing to overextend your attention into things that don't require it. That distinction matters, because many people confuse awareness with overthinking. Awareness is seeing clearly. Overthinking is looping without direction. One brings clarity, the other drains it. And most mental exhaustion doesn't come from life itself. It comes from unnecessary mental engagement. You don't need to respond to everything you notice. You don't need to analyze every situation deeply. You don't need to form opinions on every event. But the mind wants to. It wants closure. It wants control. It wants certainty. And when it doesn't get those things, it keeps thinking. That is where noise builds. Stoic thinking interrupts that cycle, not by forcing silence, but by recognizing what actually requires attention and what does not. This creates a separation between reaction and response. Reaction is instant, emotional, automatic. Response is conscious, grounded, intentional. Most people live in reaction. They feel something and immediately follow it mentally. They see something and instantly interpret it. They hear something and immediately attach meaning. And that creates constant mental movement. No stability, no grounding, just continuous internal activity. The Stoic shift is learning to pause that movement. And in that pause, something important happens. You regain control of attention. You decide whether something deserves energy or not. And that decision changes everything. Because attention is limited. You cannot give it fully to everything at once. So where it goes matters. If it goes to noise, your life feels noisy. If it goes to control, your life feels stable. And control, here, does not mean controlling outcomes. It means controlling focus. Your attention. Your response. Your direction. That is what is actually in your hands. Everything else is external, unstable, uncertain, and constantly changing. When you start practicing this shift, you begin to notice something subtle. Situations that used to affect you strongly start to lose intensity. Not because they disappeared, but because your attention is no longer fully attached to them. You observe without absorbing. You notice without reacting immediately. You engage without losing yourself in it. That is emotional stability. Not absence of feeling, but stability of attention. There is also a reduction in mental clutter, because when you stop feeding every thought, the mind becomes less crowded. You are not constantly holding multiple mental threads at once. You are not replaying, predicting, analyzing everything at the same time. You are simply here, working with what is in front of you. And that simplicity feels unfamiliar at first, because the mind is used to complexity. But over time, simplicity becomes clarity, and clarity becomes strength. Another important shift is how you deal with uncertainty. Normally, uncertainty creates mental noise. The mind tries to fill gaps with thinking. What if this happens? What if that goes wrong? What if I miss something? And that cycle creates tension. But with Stoic awareness, uncertainty is not something to solve mentally. It is something to act within. You do what you can now, and let the rest unfold. That removes unnecessary mental expansion. You stop trying to mentally control future moments that are not present yet, and your attention returns to what is real. This is not detachment from life. It is engagement with reality without distortion. Because noise distorts perception, it makes small things feel bigger. It makes simple situations feel complicated. It creates emotional weight where none is needed. And once you see that clearly, you start valuing mental clarity more than mental activity. Not every thought needs development. Not every situation needs interpretation. Not every emotion needs expansion. Some things just pass through. And your job is not to hold everything. Your job is to stay aware without losing direction. That is the Stoic shift. Not becoming emotionless, not becoming distant, but becoming selective with attention. Choosing what deserves mental space and what does not. Because in the end, your life experience is shaped by where your attention stays, not where it briefly goes. And when you learn to control that direction, noise loses its influence, and clarity becomes your default state. There is a moment many people reach in life where something feels off. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing is collapsing. Nothing is clearly wrong. Life is still moving. Days are still passing. Things are still being done. But internally, there is a quiet frustration, a feeling of being stuck. Not fully moving forward, but not completely stopped either. Just in between. And the confusing part is that from the outside, everything looks normal. You are busy. You are active. You are responding to life. You are handling responsibilities. But inside, there is no real sense of progress. No clarity, no momentum, no strong direction. And most people assume this feeling comes from not doing enough. So they try to do more effort, more tasks, more plans, more thinking. But the feeling doesn't go away, because the problem was never lack of activity. The problem is where attention is going while all of that activity is happening. This is the attention trap, and it is subtle, because it does not feel like a mistake. It feels like normal thinking. You are just observing, just reacting, just staying aware of what is happening around you. But attention is not neutral. Attention is active energy. Where it goes, your mind follows. And where your mind goes repeatedly, your life experience starts to form. Now think about how often your attention is not on your own actions. It moves outward, to other people's progress, other people's choices, other people's opinions, other people's situations. And each time that happens, something shifts inside you. Even if it is small, a slight comparison, a slight judgment, a slight emotional reaction, a slight distraction. None of it feels big in isolation. But over time, it builds a pattern. And that pattern becomes your default mental state. So instead of being fully present in your own life, you are partially present in your life and partially inside other people's lives. And that split is where the feeling of being stuck comes from. Because your energy is never fully gathered in one place long enough to create momentum. Momentum requires continuity of attention. But attention keeps breaking, not because you want it to, but because the habit of looking outward is stronger than the habit of staying inward. Now here's something important. The mind does not naturally stay focused on one direction unless it is trained to do so. It moves toward stimulation, toward comparison, toward emotional triggers, toward whatever is easiest to engage with. And in the modern world, there is no shortage of things competing for that attention. So without realizing it, your attention becomes reactive. It waits for something outside to pull it. A notification, a thought, a memory, a comparison, a curiosity. And every time that happens, your internal direction resets slightly. You lose continuity. You lose depth. You lose grounding. And that is why life feels like it is not building properly. Because building requires sustained attention, not scattered attention. Now let's make this clearer. Imagine your attention like a beam of light. If it stays focused on one point, it becomes powerful. It starts to shape, create, and influence that area. But if it keeps moving, shifting, jumping from one place to another, it never builds intensity anywhere. It just flickers. And flickering attention creates flickering progress. Small efforts that don't accumulate into something stable. That is the attention trap. Not lack of effort, but lack of sustained direction. Another layer of this trap is emotional attachment to what you observe. When your attention goes outward, it does not just observe. It reacts. It compares. It evaluates. It assigns meaning. And those reactions consume energy. So now you are not just looking at other people's lives. You are emotionally engaging with them, even silently, even internally. And that emotional engagement drains your focus from your own path. You might not notice it immediately, but over time, it builds fatigue, a mental tiredness that does not come from work, but from constant internal processing, thinking about things that are not yours to control, responding mentally to things that do not require your response, carrying emotional weight that does not belong to your situation. And this is why even simple tasks start to feel heavier than they should, because part of your energy is already used up before you begin. Now here is where the real shift begins. You are not stuck because life is blocking you. Stuck because attention is fragmented, and fragmented attention cannot build anything strong. It can only maintain movement without direction. So the question is not how do I do more? The question is, where is my attention repeatedly going? Because that is what is shaping your internal experience. If your attention is constantly pulled outward, your life will feel externally controlled. If your attention is directed inward, your life will feel internally guided. This is the difference between reacting to life and shaping it. And most people are not aware of how often they are reacting instead of directing. They think they are making decisions, but many decisions are actually responses to external influence. Something heard, something compared, something felt. And that is not real direction. That is reaction in disguise. The attention trap keeps you in that loop, always responding, rarely initiating with full clarity. Now the uncomfortable truth is this. You cannot fix this by force. You cannot simply tell yourself, focus more, and expect lasting change. Because attention is not controlled by intention alone. It is controlled by habit. And habits are built through repeated direction, which means the shift has to be gradual, not intense, but consistent. Each time you notice your attention drifting outward, you bring it back. Not with pressure, but with awareness. Back to what you are doing. Back to what you can control. Back to your present action. And at first, this will feel like a constant struggle, because the mind is used to movement, used to distraction, used to jumping. But slowly, something changes. The gaps between distractions become longer. The pull becomes weaker. The return becomes easier. And you start experiencing something different. Moments of full presence, where you are not mentally elsewhere, where you are not comparing, where you are not reacting internally to external noise, just present with what you are doing. And that presence is what creates clarity. Not complexity, not overthinking, clarity. Because when attention is stable, thinking becomes simple, decisions become direct, emotions become easier to understand, and life stops feeling like a scattered experience. It starts feeling structured again, not perfect, but aligned. And that alignment is what was missing all along. Not more effort, not more input, but attention returning to its rightful place, inside your own life, on your own actions, in your own direction. The truth is simple. You are not stuck in life. You are just looking everywhere except where you are supposed to build. There is a point where awareness is no longer enough. You start noticing things clearly. You see how your attention moves. You understand how often it goes outward. You recognize the mental noise, the comparison, the constant reacting. But seeing it is only the beginning. Because awareness without change becomes frustration. You start thinking, I see the problem, so why am I still doing it? And this is where most people get stuck. They understand the pattern, but they don't rebuild the direction of their attention. So the same cycle continues. Not because they don't know better, but because they haven't trained themselves to come back to themselves consistently. This is the rebuild phase, and it is not about becoming a different person. It is about redirecting where your mind naturally goes. Slowly, repeatedly, without pressure. The goal is not perfection. The goal is return. Every time your attention leaves your own life, you bring it back. Not with frustration, not with judgment, just with awareness. Back to what you are doing. Back to what is in front of you. Back to your own actions. At first, this feels like effort, because your mind resists it. It is used to wandering, used to reacting, used to being pulled by external things. So when you try to bring it back, it feels unnatural. But that is only because it is unfamiliar, not because it is wrong. Over time, something changes. The return becomes faster. The distraction becomes weaker. and your attention starts to stay in one place longer. That is the beginning of rebuilding. Now the rebuild phase is not about adding more to your life. It is about removing unnecessary direction, because most mental exhaustion does not come from lack of focus. It comes from too many directions at once, too many mental tabs open, many thoughts running in the background, too many emotional reactions happening silently. So instead of adding more effort, you reduce unnecessary mental movement. You simplify your attention. You bring it back to one thing at a time, one action, one thought, one moment. That is where clarity begins to return. But there is something deeper happening here too. When you start focusing inward again, you begin to notice your own patterns more clearly. Not just distractions, but habits of thinking. How quickly you judge things, how easily you compare, how often you assume instead of observing. And once you see these patterns, you cannot unsee them. They become visible in real time. And that visibility creates space for change, because now you are not operating blindly. You are observing your own mind while it moves. And that observation changes behavior naturally, not through force, but through awareness. Now let's talk about something most people miss. Focusing on yourself is not just about productivity or goals. It is about internal alignment, meaning your thoughts, attention, and actions start moving in the same direction. Right now, for most people, these three are separated. Thoughts go one way, attention goes another, actions go somewhere else. So even when they are busy, there is no real unity inside. That is why progress feels inconsistent. But when you begin the rebuild phase, something starts to align. Your attention stays closer to your actions. Your thoughts become more connected to reality instead of imagination or comparison. And your actions become more intentional, not scattered. This alignment is what creates stability, not intensity, not pressure, stability. Another important part of this phase is learning to reduce mental reaction. Right now, most people react immediately to what they see or think. Something appears in the mind, and they engage with it instantly. No gap, no space, just automatic response. The rebuild phase introduces a small gap, a pause, even if it is only a second. In that pause, you regain control. You decide whether to engage or not, whether to continue the thought or let it pass, whether to react or stay with your current action. That pause is powerful, because it breaks automatic patterns. And once a pattern is broken even slightly, it loses strength over time. So instead of trying to eliminate distractions completely, you reduce your reaction to them. You start noticing, this thought is here, but I don't need to follow it. This distraction appeared, but I don't need to engage with it. This comparison showed up, but I don't need to continue it. And slowly, your mind learns a new behavior. Not instant reaction, but selective attention. Now let's go deeper. One of the biggest changes in this phase is how you experience your own presence. Before, your mind was constantly somewhere else. Now, there are moments where it actually stays with you, in what you are doing, in what you are thinking, in what is real right now. And these moments feel different. Not exciting, not dramatic, just clear, simple, stable. You start realizing that clarity does not come from thinking more. It comes from thinking less about unnecessary things and focusing more on what is directly in front of you. That shift changes everything internally, because your energy stops being divided. It starts gathering. And gathered attention creates depth. Depth in thinking, depth in awareness, depth in action. Now here is something important to understand. The rebuild phase is not linear. You will have moments of clarity, followed by moments of distraction, moments of focus, followed by moments of slipping back. That is normal, because you are not replacing yourself, you are retraining attention. And attention has old habits. Those habits don't disappear instantly, they weaken gradually. So the key is not to be perfect. The key is to return again and again. Each return strengthens the new pattern. Each awareness weakens the old one. And over time, the balance shifts. Without force, without pressure, just consistency. Another shift that happens here is emotional distance from unnecessary noise. Things that used to feel important start feeling less urgent. Opinions that used to affect you start losing weight. Comparisons that used to trigger you start fading in intensity. Not because you stopped caring about life, but because your attention is no longer fully invested in everything. You begin to choose where energy goes, and that choice changes your emotional state. Less chaos, less reaction, more internal space, and that space is where clarity grows. Because when your mind is not constantly reacting, it can finally observe properly, and observation leads to better decisions. Better decisions lead to better direction, and better direction leads to real progress. Not imagined progress, not mental progress, real progress. Now the rebuild phase also teaches something subtle but important. You don't need to fix everything at once. You just need to stop abandoning yourself mentally throughout the day. Every time you come back to your own attention, you are rebuilding. Even if it is small, even if it is repeated, even if it feels slow, because attention is not rebuilt in one moment. It is rebuilt in many returns. So instead of trying to change everything at once, focus on this simple movement. Notice, return, continue. That is enough. And over time, something shifts quietly. Your mind becomes less scattered. Your thinking becomes more direct. Your energy becomes more stable. And your life starts feeling less fragmented. Not because external circumstances changed, but because internal attention stopped leaking in every direction. This is the rebuild phase. Not becoming someone new, but finally staying with yourself long enough to build something real. Something starts to shift when your attention stops running everywhere. It's not loud. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough moment. There's no sudden transformation where everything becomes perfect. It's quieter than that. You just notice you're not as mentally scattered as before. Things that used to pull you in don't grab you as quickly anymore. Your mind doesn't jump at everything it sees. There's a small pause before reaction. Sometimes there's no reaction at all. And that changes how you move through your day. You start to realize something simple but powerful. Most of your stress was never coming from your actual life. It was coming from how often your mind left your life. Now that attention is coming back, everything feels more stable. Even small tasks feel easier, not because they changed, but because you're actually present while doing them. You're not splitting your focus between your life and everything else anymore. And that's where quiet strength begins. It's not about being emotionally shut down. It's not about ignoring everything. It's about not giving your attention away so easily. You stop reacting to every opinion. You stop mentally entering every situation you observe. You stop carrying things that don't belong to you. And slowly, people start noticing something different about you. Not because you're trying to appear strong, but because you're no longer overextending your energy everywhere. You don't explain yourself as much. You don't rush to justify your decisions. You don't get pulled into unnecessary conversations in the same way. There's a kind of calm distance in how you respond. Not cold, not detached, just steady. And that steadiness comes from attention finally being grounded. When your mind stops constantly jumping outward, something else becomes visible. Your own thinking. You start catching your patterns in real time. When you begin to compare, you notice it earlier. When your mind starts to drift, you catch it faster. When you're about to react emotionally, There's a small moment where you can choose not to. That moment changes everything, because that is where control returns. Not control over life, control over yourself. And that is the only control that actually matters. With time, your decisions become simpler. You don't need to overthink everything. You don't need to mentally simulate every outcome. You act more directly because your mind isn't overloaded with unnecessary noise. And that simplicity feels powerful. Not because life becomes easy, but because you are no longer complicating it internally. There's also something else that happens. You stop needing constant validation from outside. Not because you don't care about people, but because your sense of direction is no longer dependent on how others respond. You begin to trust your own attention again, your own judgment, your own presence, and that trust creates quiet confidence. Not the kind that needs to be shown, the kind that is already there, even when nothing is being said. Over time, you also notice that emotional reactions don't control you the way they used to. Situations still happen, thoughts still appear, but they don't pull you as deeply anymore. There's space between you and your reactions, and in that space, you stay grounded. That space is where strength lives, not in intensity, not in force, but in not being easily pulled away from yourself. And slowly, life starts to feel less like something happening to you, and more like something you are present within. That is the quiet change. No noise, no announcement, just a stable mind that no longer runs away from itself. At the end of all this, something very simple becomes clear. You were never actually stuck. You were just scattered. Not physically, mentally. Your life didn't feel heavy because of what was happening around you. It felt heavy because your attention was never fully with you. Always moving, always reacting, always reaching outward. And now, after everything you've seen and understood, the real shift is not about adding anything new to your life. It's about returning. Returning your attention back to where your life actually is. Not in comparison, not in observation of others, not in mental conversations that go nowhere, but here. In your own actions, in your own thoughts, in your own decisions. When you start living like this, something changes quietly. You stop feeling pulled in so many directions at once. You stop mentally living in other people's lives. You stop reacting to every external signal as if it defines your direction. And instead, you begin to stay with yourself longer. At first it feels unfamiliar, because the mind is used to movement, used to noise, used to constant engagement. So when things become quieter internally, it almost feels like something is missing. But nothing is missing. It's just that the noise is gone. And without noise, you can finally hear your own direction again. Just clearer. You start noticing that you don't need as much external input as you thought. You don't need constant comparison to understand your progress. You don't need constant validation to feel stable. You don't need constant reaction to feel involved in life. You just need attention that stays where you place it. And when that happens, your experience of life becomes different. Not because life itself changes, but because your relationship with it changes. You stop mentally leaving your present moment. You stop carrying unnecessary emotional weight from things that don't belong to you. You stop splitting your focus between your life and everything else. And slowly, your energy begins to feel more whole. Not divided, not leaking, more whole. There is also a quiet confidence that starts forming here. Not the kind that needs to be shown. Not the kind that depends on being seen a certain way, but the kind that comes from not abandoning yourself mentally anymore. You stay with your thoughts instead of escaping them. You stay with your actions instead of overthinking them. You stay with your own direction instead of constantly checking others. And that creates a kind of stability that is hard to explain but easy to feel. Because you are no longer mentally everywhere except where you are. You are here, fully, and that changes how even small moments feel. You are no longer rushing internally while appearing calm externally. You are actually present, and presence is what makes life feel real again. Not complicated, not overwhelming, just real. At this point, nothing dramatic is needed. No big transformation, no perfect discipline. Just this simple understanding. Your life becomes clearer when your attention stops leaving it. And once you see that, you stop trying to fix everything outside. You start watching where your mind goes and gently bringing it back. Again and again. Not with force, but with awareness. And over time, that becomes your natural state. So the final realization is not something new you learn. It is something you return to. Your attention belongs here, with you, not everywhere else. And when it stays here long enough, life stops feeling like something you are chasing, and starts feeling like something you are finally living.